Howdy, y'all. This is not David Cobb. David is traveling right now, and in his place, this is Sachin Peddada. I am the research coordinator of the Progressive International. We're a coalition of over 100 progressive political parties, trade unions, and social movements all over the world. And I have the pleasure of being joined by Tom Molteni. Hi, Tom. I think you might be muted, Tom.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, no,
okay.
I can hear you.
Yeah, my name's Tom Molteni. I work with Cooperation Vermont, part of the People's Network for Land and Liberation. And we do all sorts of community organizing locally, nationally, and internationally. So happy to be with you today.
Sweet. Yeah, so like Tom mentioned, he works at Cooperation Vermont, which is affiliated with the People's Network for Land and Liberation. And that's actually how I met Tom. And that's also how I know David, is through the PNLL. They are a fantastic group that does fantastic work. And actually, a week and a half ago, I was at a conference in Atlanta. I was invited by the People's Network for Land and Liberation and also the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, which David co-runs. And they had a Resist and Build summit in Atlanta. And there were solidarity economy organizers all over the country. Michelle from Cooperation Vermont was there, and several folks all over the country had convened basically to develop concrete strategies for solidarity economy organizers across the U.S. The first day of the conference, Friday, in the morning, we received word that the Gaza Freedom Flotilla boat, the name of the vessel is the Conscience, was bombed by Israel off the coast of Malta. Thankfully, nobody aboard was injured, but the boat's motor was destroyed by the bombing, and it was slowly sinking into the water with tons of aid on board, trying to break the siege on Gaza. And the very ironic and sickening bit of this that immediately jumped out to me was the aircraft that Israel used to bomb the flotilla. It's a C-130 Hercules is what it's called, and Tom might know a little bit more about this than I do. But it was made in Marietta, Georgia, 20 miles away from where we were having this conference, by a Lockheed Martin facility on an Air Force base. Again, 20 miles away from where we were. And this, just to put things in perspective, this program at this particular Lockheed facility in the year 2024 alone received $16.2 billion from the Department of Defense to specifically make these warplanes that are dropping bombs on, people in Palestine and also on people trying to deliver aid to people in Palestine, which is crazy to think about when you think about all the issues in the US that $16.2 billion could solve. And so anyway, in the wake of this attack on the flotilla, a group of us at the summit very quickly and kind of spontaneously formed a team to launch a rapid response. And so the conference continued on, but our team also concurrently was working on trying to get a new flag for the vessel, contacting tugboat operators to try to get the vessel towed. And we also coordinated the release of an open letter, which hopefully y'all viewers have seen on nomoresuppressedsolidarity.com. And basically we were urging, U.S. organizations to act in solidarity with the flotilla and with Gaza. So having said all of that, Tom, you and I were working on trying to get a tugboat operator to tow this vessel. And I'm wondering what kind of lessons and reflections you can share from that experience. And as an organizer in Vermont, fighting for a better world, what are your thoughts on the attack and its significance and what it means for us here in our movement?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I would start off, first off, like, it is so critical and imperative that, organizations like the PNLL, like VCPL, and a whole kind of coalition of international organizations, all kind of came to the immediate response from every angle that they possibly could, to try to drive the necessary popular dissent to be able to respond and ultimately force the Maltese government to actually recognize the crisis and respond and support in providing aid, towing the vessel and allowing for it to conduct repairs. That's absolutely critical. But to me, the most kind of the biggest lesson that I learned and took away from trying to coordinate reaching out to really countless aid organizations, corporate or commercial shipping and recovery agents is just how brutally pervasive the kind of Zionist messaging and their campaign has been to make it such an untouchable effort to support. So really any opposition and identification of in communicating with these, commercial recovery assets, independent tugboats, whether they were really large or really small, was once you got past the identification of the vessel and saying this was the conscience, it's stuck, right? It's incapacitated at sea. As soon as they identified, oh, that's the vessel that was headed to Gaza, that's the vessel that Israel, attacked in the middle of the night, then it immediately became a nope, we're not touching this. It's not something that we'll support. And that was the most kind of startling, even from a commercial level, but down to that aid organization of where it's just an untenable solution, and then you have this crew that's just completely abandoned, taking on water, and all of the aid just held, all to support the inhumanity of the genocide. It was pretty disgusting and disheartening and frustrating. But I think the other takeaway in identifying one recognition of the extreme lack of any aid that's been able to reach Gaza for really the last 2 months, and the absolute futility of the the good measure efforts made. Right, you take the floating pier that the U.S. spent $330 million to have in operation for 20 days, right? Just the enormous amount of expenditure, and even that, just that small amount of aid had to be disposed of, right? It couldn't be allowed to reach Gaza because, this was a specific sortie. This was a KC-130, part of the Israeli Air Force, departing in the evening for a specific mission, circling Maltese air, identifying the vessel, waiting until it's dark when they can most effectively terrorize and have the plausible deniability that, oh, we don't know what happened. We just saw explosions. We didn't see it come from that airship flying around. It was so intentional. Blatantly, but then it's not a matter of the small amount of aid actually reaching these people. It's a matter of strategic communication to dissuade any attempt. It doesn't matter if it's specific nation states speaking out. It doesn't matter if it's Yemen lobbing missiles and trying to blockade the Red Sea to force them to respond and to have some decency, or if it's a completely independent grassroots, just the tiniest attempt to help, nothing can be allowed. There is no quarter, and it's all to create this environment and this atmosphere and this sentiment that the extermination of Palestine is is insured, right? And so seeing that both in terms of the specific attack, but then also how effective that messaging has been in trying to coordinate any sort of response for something that in so many other situations would have, it's money in the bank, right? Like, these organizations exist to respond to crises, to make money off of insurance, and to be like, cool, we paid, the tugboat guy for 5 hours and we just made 60 grand. None of that could be allowed to happen. And so it was just really, pretty startling and indicative of just the how vile their campaign is against the Palestinians.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because we've seen since before October of 2023, but especially since, steady, uninterrupted flows of military cargo from the U.S. and other countries to Israel to continue this genocide, right? And the supply of military cargo is unquestioned. It's very difficult to get in the middle of that and to intervene even for a single shipment, let alone the entire program. And on the flip side, the aid that is saving people's lives as they're being bombarded is blocked at every level. And it's just a very ironic and disturbing sort of situation. And to your point, I also think that there's an element of, you can maybe take solidarity with your words, but you definitely, if you take action, actually try to deliver aid, you're going to be bombed. And it sends a very clear message, which I guess gets at, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you see the really across the globe, but across the, Western democracies, the explicit crackdown on even voicing opinion and opposition. Here in the U.S., it's ramped up to extreme, in terms of our understanding of freedom of speech and our rights as citizens and as people inside of the United States. It's an extreme crackdown on just even being able to voice that opinion. And so it's such a clear escalation and demonstration that, they will squash anyone who raises a voice, or who, tries to actually deliver aid. And to your point of how just nonstop and unchallenged, unabated our military support has been to Israel in really since October 7th. But in the United States, there was outrage that we had postponed some shipments arriving to Israel, and what we are able to move, how and where we're able to move it across the globe as a military force is unrivaled and really like unimaginable in terms of what we can actually do. And for Gaza to be allowed to be in such a position of desperation and famine is under our, with our complete awareness and complicity, is absolutely blood on our hands. It's really unconscionable.
Yeah, and this gets it. So right, like the American people are not the American government, and I think that's important to clarify in a lot of these conversations, because, like, yes, there are certainly many people who do support the violence that we're seeing, but by and large, it's not exactly, we don't live in a democracy as you and I know, and as hopefully the viewers and listeners know, we don't live in a real democracy. The people's will is not expressed by the people that have power or the institutions that have power. And this gets at the idea, right, of building people power, building an alternative, like radical alternatives that actually have real power to deliver aid, to save lives instead of delivering weapons and killing people. And actually, so the title of the summit that we were at, hosted by the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network in Atlanta, was called "Resist and Build," which is a formulation of how building dual power works. And the idea, right, is you must at once be resisting against the violence of the existing system while also building the new system that you want to replace the existing system with, one that prioritizes people over profit, one that prioritizes aid over arms, that kind of thing. And it's important to be doing both at the same time, the resisting and the building. And I think doing one but not doing both is not going to get us where we need to get. And so I'm curious, just in your own experience, in your own context, what does it look like to kind of fuse those two things together, the resist and the build? And how do we come up with concrete strategies for action that doesn't privilege one over the other, that is doing both?
Yeah, and I've thought about it quite a bit, and I think, for me, I think very much building is the work, right? And it's sometimes relationship building, it's capacity building, it's actually infrastructure development, and being able to rise to that occasion and to meet those needs and fill those gaps, like very intentionally. Here in Vermont, we've struggled quite a bit, quite recently in the last couple of years, with natural disasters and identifying the gaps that exist, and being able to build and fill those capacities to identify a different way forward, right? So it feels particularly imposing now as we see kind of the destruction of FEMA from the federal government side, but also we're able to see that the capacity lies within us, and it lies within our communities in terms of cooperation and building awareness and solidarity, and really just communing together and identifying how we can support each other, what skills people have, and how to leverage those in support of each other. And then in terms of the resisting, for me, it's much more of how we employ what we've built through networks, relationships, capacities, infrastructure, and how we employ that to resist the myriad of influences that try to kind of co-opt us into kind of passively supporting the oppression that exists around us. And so part of that is, creating very big tents, identifying, supporting, caring for, and protecting the kind of increasingly marginalized populations around us, and as they exist internationally. And so really kind of building from the grassroots up, and connecting with those adjacent nodes, and identifying those capacities, and then being able to resist both kind of pointedly and to rise to a specific occasion, but then more broadly in terms of sorts of things, but resource sharing, capacity sharing, even just caring for one another. And so I think, a lot of it is resisting the fear tactics, resisting the kind of fascist narratives that exist and pervade inside of society, and opposing those, calling them out, opposing them, and then modeling alternatives. And that it's really through that action, with that mindset, that we're able to make some headway. But in opposing the military industrial complex and opposing imperial power and violence, it is absolutely a scary fight, and one that has to be strategic.
Yeah, this gets kind of at a specific question, which is thinking about the military-industrial complex. The U.S. Department of Defense, the DoD, is about to have $1 trillion budget for the next fiscal year, which is absolutely insane. The DoD is also the same entity that consistently claims the dishonor of being the largest institutional polluter in the world, right? It consumes the most fossil fuels in the world,
By far.
subsequently pollutes the most by far. And the same DoD that's also killing our planet is also, funneling billions of dollars into weapons contractors all over the country. Every single congressional district has at least one DoD contractor within its borders, which is by design. And these dollars are being used to make weapons that are killing people, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza and elsewhere around the world. And that money could solve homelessness. It could end hunger. It could, fight against climate change in significant ways. There's a lot that could be done with that money. And it's I don't know, it's hard to even, like, I think it's easy to talk about why it's bad, but it's so hard to think about, like, what does a world without the military industrial complex look like, because it's so pervasive and it's everywhere. It's hard to be structured in that way.
Absolutely. And it's not that way by mistake, right? It is incredibly intentional, in terms of the build out and the support and the incentives provided, to enable industry, right? Like we talk about the offshoring of American industry, and how much we don't make anything anymore. And it's a false narrative. We do. It's just that most of what we make is defense exports and homegrown defense. So you see JD Vance talking about kids are going to go without dolls, but don't you want to know that your arms aren't being made by some foreign country, which is just such a joke, as we are far and away, and have been for decades, the absolute leading manufacturer of arms and the leading exporter of arms across the world. And where those industries are is quite intentional, because of the literal money faucet that exists for defense spending, defense industry, defense contracting, and now the evolution of that industry from not even being material goods, right? It's even less. Like, it's become a problem inside of the DoD that they aren't able to make enough artillery shells. But that's because they're prioritizing making Hellfire missiles, right? They're making Reaper, MQ-9 Reaper drones, or they're making even smaller drones, or they're spending all of that money in tech and developing the surveillance state, or trying to put AI into the defense industry. And so but that is done. Even here in Vermont, we have a Raytheon plant that makes small parts for Hellfire missiles. And that is done to ensure the complicity of those state representatives, that they have jobs, they have money, they have support. And if they play along with the, kind of imperial plans and strategy, then they can hang on to their localized power. And when called upon, they will say thumbs up every time because it means that they don't have to think about their primaries.
Mhm.
And so when we think about how do we oppose, how do we resist, how do we influence a change to that dynamic when we have such a pervasive and oppressive imperial structure shaped around violence and enabling violence and exporting violence and exporting the logistical support and supply chain and maintenance of violence. Um, it has to be in the form of very specific and accountable representation that disrupts the status quo of politicians with deep pockets that they just fill up at the money tree. Um, I really think that that's the only way. But what we also see, right, because it's ever evolving hydra, is that the defense industry, the DoD, just offshores or not offshores, but trickles down their equipment to local police, to state police, to SWAT teams, to response teams, and just further embeds both in terms of having access to state budgets, to county budgets, but also to ever growing list of localized politicians who need to have those things and who are able to offer those things to support local businesses, right? To the Chamber of Commerce. Don't worry, here in Minneapolis, we will protect your businesses because we've got MRAPs with, 50 cal machine guns, and we've got microwave crowd dispersal equipment that was developed for Iraq. But don't worry, we've got it, so you can keep your stores open. Don't worry about Black Lives Matter. And so it's only through like growing those representatives, those democratic representatives who specifically oppose that and who allow for the accountability measures to stand for it.
Yeah. And I think this gets at right. The size of that task, right, is pretty monumental, and it requires, a lot of investment in in time and other resources to ensuring that the right kind of candidates are running with the support of people in their jurisdictions. And as we're confronting this ongoing genocide and climate catastrophe and jobs and the tariffs now and everything, it seems like the urgency of this moment requires us to rethink things at a more fundamental level. And I do agree that representation in our existing political systems has to be significantly bettered if that's possible. But I also think that we shouldn't wait until there's an election to feel like we can do something about this, right?
Yeah, yeah, truly. And I think we, particularly in America, because we have such binary, like such a binary democratic like facade, right? Is that the typical, kind of everyday American thinks of democracy. Well, and you think about the just extreme lack of any democratic representation that we have outside of when we go to vote. You go to a job and you don't get to decide what you're working on. You don't get to decide what your hours are going to be. You don't get to participate in democracy except for the one time that you go place your ballot on this day. But part of that is then that we need to be involved and engaged in that process, 365, like 24/7, 365. And part of it is is developing that like consciousness and awareness and just like consciously and empathetically engaging with people to help them see and understand the world around them, and that they can take action no matter how big or small, and that they can you know be a link in the chain to inform and elevate that awareness, that then when it comes time to do the tangible act of voting, that all of that work has been done. um, that being said, like, we aren't just opposing the Republicans, the institutions, right? Like that are holding on to that power for absolute dear life. They are, of course, who we are opposing as well. And so it's identifying those hypocrisies, those incongruities with like real what's in front of our eyes, right? Like if you have a representative who is not willing to look their constituents in the face and say Israel is attempting to exterminate the Palestinian people through a genocide facilitated by starvation and famine, if they can't do that, then they are complicit inside of the system serving a power which, like, we can see that they are capitulating. And so growing that awareness and that perspective to then say, we are holding you accountable, uh, it's the only way to operate inside of the system that we have as it, you know, continues on its trajectory, whatever that is.
Yeah. And I think to that point, right? Like, it is important to pan back and remember that, one, the genocide began under Biden,
Oh,
who
of course.
is not a Republican. And it has, significant bipartisan support. The military industrial complex has virtually unanimous support for what it does from elected officials. And there was coverage on the genocide, consistent, and maybe it was not consistent, but like mainstream media talked about it, even if the tone was, not perfect, left some to be desired. But since Trump came into office, his administration has been dominating the media headlines with, things like ICE and the tariffs and Doge and like all these very sort of salacious, very provocative sort of acts that he's taken, and it's completely taken our media's attention away from talking about the fact that, there's still an ongoing genocide in Palestine, funded by U.S. tax dollars, armed by U.S. made weapons. Zero aid has entered the Gaza Strip in 2 months. All of its people are on the brink of death by starvation. And again, this is bipartisan violence. And as I guess I'm thinking about, we know the capitalist system is evil. It's not reformable. It is doing what it has always done. And Trump is not. Yes, he's evil, but his evil is not unique. I think the evil is baked into the system, right? And so I'm thinking about how much energy we as a movement spend on resisting Trump as a unique threat, as opposed to resisting against the system and building a new system entirely. And I'm thinking about Palestine, especially because, again, it's really dire right now over there, and we need to make sure that we don't cede ground or lose steam. And so I guess I'm wondering, in our current conditions, within our own borders and, in Palestine, how do we continue to fight for justice? And I also will just say really quickly, Huwaida has joined us, and I don't know if, Huwaida, you're able to join us on video, but wonderful.
Amazing.
Hi. I will say very briefly as an introduction for Huwaida She is a Palestinian American attorney and human rights activist. And over the past couple of decades, she's been involved in a number of legal and grassroots initiatives for Palestinian rights, including she co-founded the International Solidarity Movement in 2001, which is a Palestinian-led nonviolent resistance movement that has been nominated for 2 Nobel Peace Prizes. And Huwaida is also a primary organizer with the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, and she was traveling with it when it was attacked by Israeli forces in 2010. And so she's very familiar with the context that we set earlier on the episode. And I excited to be joined by you, Huwaida. And just to catch you up on what we were talking about, I was just asking the question of, if we understand that the system itself is the problem, and it's not Trump specifically, and it's, just how things are run in this country and in the world system, how do we continue to frontline the fight for Palestinian liberation, even as the media is not talking about what needs to be talked about?
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for having me on this show. And I'm sorry, I'm coming to you from my car here, but assuming you hear me okay, I mean, that is a big question. And I feel like, I don't know if I necessarily have the perfect answer, but what I feel like is that we are always running after catastrophes, right? Specifically in Palestine, I've been saying that we are always running after trying to kind of put band-aids or solve these crises that Israel is creating, and are not taking enough time to really kind of organize in terms of the larger picture and invest time and resources in changing the political dynamics that leave us in these kinds of situations where, as I heard you say, like 2 million people are on the brink of death in Gaza, and we have the world powers who are just forcing us to kind of watch Israel's rogue, violent apartheid state systematically starve people that have been warehoused in this concentration camp and bombed mercilessly for 19 months and already deprived. It's been over a year that doctors have been talking about people dying from preventable conditions, things that they can heal from, but their bodies aren't strong enough because of starvation. And so that and other things that are killing people. And now we're in the 3rd month, 70 days without one drop of water, at a time when humanitarian organizations say that Gaza needs 600 truckfuls every single day just to meet people's basic necessities. 600 truckfuls per day, and it's been like 70 days that you've not had one truck enter. So it is beyond catastrophic, and the fact that we are just watching this is horrifying, I think, to a lot of us, and really should kind of be an awakening in terms of the place that we are in and what this means. I mean, it is genocide for Palestinians now. What does it mean for any other people tomorrow? And all of us, the situation that we're in. And so I don't have the answer, but we definitely, as you said, I think we can diagnose the problem is that we are always kind of reacting. And I think also there's an element of not believing enough in ourselves. And just to give a brief example, it might be a little off point, but these last elections in the United States, so many people were disgusted, really not happy with the choices that we had. A lot of people talking about maybe voting third party and whatnot. And then when it came down to it, a lot of just people that I know personally, when they got to the ballot box, felt they couldn't vote third party. It would be, they felt for this would be throwing our vote away. And for one reason or another, they voted the way that they did. And there are, I acknowledge, problems with the whole kind of third party system that we have, and that we haven't invested enough in building it. And so when it comes to election time, there isn't much faith that it could really mean anything if you cast your vote for a third party. But that's all part of the same problem, in that we do need to spend more time building, but we are so overwhelmed, and I am very guilty of this also, so overwhelmed and always responding to like a genocide,
Mm-hmm.
that And that's something that we have to deal with. Again, I don't have the answer, but we very much know what the problem is.
Yeah. I think it here in America, Americans are so completely removed from any concept of the lived conditions and experiences that that are the direct result of our actions and our support, and what that does. And so part of I think a necessity inside of America and driving any sort of change is really forcing people to look at it, to see it with their own eyes, and to not look away. And we can have the mainstream media, which will move from one, salacious story to another. But we see it and we know it. And we also see the system's response to it, right? Like the entire conversation around TikTok and how threatening that is in terms of national security, under the useful scapegoat of, Chinese data mining versus let alone the data mining that the US is doing. But part of what was so truly kind of existential to the system and why it was such a risk is because you had 150 million people who were able to see with their own eyes, through the eyes of the Palestinians, the absolute horror and disgusting violence that was being inflicted upon them, only made possible with the direct, explicit, continued support of the United States. Israel cannot continue; they can hardly continue to exist in a state of nonviolence without U.S. support, let alone being able to inflict what they're doing. And so, in terms of how do we build and pressure and continue find ways to maintain Palestine inside of our awareness and something that we continue to fight for, I think it has to be the continued growing of people who see it and who call it for what it is and who build that solidarity for action, because the system will do everything it can to make you forget, to look away, to think about the next football season, think about the Olympics, the World Cup, whatever it is. They'll bread and circus their way to enabling them to just continue violence as they always have. And
yeah, and I think that's the other part of this that's so nefarious, right? Is that this violence is quotidian. I mean, even before October of 2023, life was not great in Palestine because of the occupation, let alone what life was like for Palestinians in 48 in Israel proper. And you have, tens of thousands of illegal settlers in the West Bank, that number, or hundreds of thousands, I'm sorry, of illegal settlers that have been steadily pouring into the West Bank even before October 2023. And I also think that it's hard to look at that and not see the really jarring similarities with the founding of this country. Dispossession, genocide, exploitation to inordinate degrees. And that's just capitalism. I mean, it's settler colonialism in its form, but it's driven by the logic of capitalism. And the genocide that's happening in Gaza right now is a very extreme example of the violence of capitalism wherever it exists. And I also think that there's something to be said for the attacks, the genocide against people in Gaza right now, and also the attacks on the flotilla, the attacks on people that were trying to act in solidarity the Palestinians in Gaza, like that's a foreshadowing to me in a sense of what the system is ready to do to us. It's a warning to us. It's telling us one day you will be in that position, and this is the violence that's headed for you. And I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts on this are, and the importance of internationalism, I guess, in what we're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am just really outraged, although I'm tired of saying I'm outraged, but the fact that there hasn't really been condemnation of the attack on the flotilla by any European country when Israel violated European airspace, really, and came into European waters to hit a civilian vessel that was going to take aid to Gaza. So forget about, civilian vessel, enough. A direct attack on a civilian vessel is a war crime. It is unlawful. But then, and Israel used to, it's not the first time. It has hit us before. It has killed members, volunteers from our teams before, in international waters, which is also illegal. But now it goes about 2,000 kilometers out of its way into Maltese airspace and into European waters. We were only 14 miles off the coast of Malta, and bombs us there, and European countries are silent. And this is part of also the complicity of Europe. We talk about the United States, yes, is absolutely the foremost enabler of what Israel is doing, but also you have the Arab world that is complicit, that is silent, and that just, issues a kind of statement or has its conferences or its summits and doesn't do anything practical to use the leverage that it could have. You have all of Europe that is also kind of subservient. You have a couple of states kind of breaking away and defying the United States, first and foremost, Spain. But still, there seems to be a limit. And for years that we have been trying to break the siege on Gaza, one of the things that we have been saying is that, countries should be doing this. There's no question that this is unlawful. There's no question that this is a war crime this is collective punishment. And not only collective punishment, now it's kind of this unlawful siege, just collective punishment that is part of Israel's genocidal intent and plan in Gaza. And every single country that is not actively defying it is part of it. And not only are these countries not actively defying it, but these countries in the Mediterranean have been stopping our efforts to get to Gaza. So even countries that would say that they are friendly to Palestine, Turkey, you have the entire population basically that supports Palestine, and the government making these, grandiose statements. But last year, when we were ready to go, we had hundreds of people and 3 huge ships, and we had a cargo ship with 5,000 tons of aid ready to sail. We were initially sabotaged by one of the 5 countries that withdrew its flag, but then we resolved that, and Turkey stopped our boats from going for months, held our boats hostage. And so all of these, and before that it was Greece, and before that it was Cyprus. All of these countries are not only not breaking the siege themselves, not challenging it, but actively sabotaging our efforts to do so in service of Israel. And this is, I think, in Europe, maybe they have a little, generally we hear Europe is a little bit more respectful of, or gives more respect to international law, although they have been violating it. But I think that there is space there for a lot of our young comrades to put pressure on their countries to work together to stand up to the United States, because we also know it's the United States is bullying and throwing around its economic influence and otherwise in order to pressure governments to do its bidding and to not defy what the US/Israeli plan is. But that's where we need to, I think, escalate our efforts there. These countries do need to work together to be and I say Europe, but I think my bigger hope is in the global South, really, of forming this counter to the US bullying and imperialism. And that's been happening for sure. And some countries are suffering for it. We see the United States, has sanctioned South Africa. And it will continue to, again, bully countries that do stand up. But as much as we can support these countries and their comrades in these countries, and that they are working together also, this is some of the stuff that we have to do to begin to confront this. Because Israel just said it can go anywhere to stop solidarity with Gaza, with Palestine, to really attack anybody that attempts to stand in the way of its genocidal plans, and nobody dares say anything about it. And as you said, I think it's foreshadowing what is to come if we don't stop it. And so that is the challenge. I really see this as yes, I'm Palestinian. Yes, I'm deeply tied to everyone there, and want to and need to. Well, let me not even say that. It's not even a Palestinian thing. I mean, it's a human thing that we are fighting in the way that we are. But we also know it's about saving Palestine today, or Palestinians, but tomorrow, really, everybody and this world order, because we're up against a world order where on one side we have these imperialist, former colonial, current colonial powers that are telling you they can trample all over international law. International law doesn't apply to the powerful, and then you have us who are saying, like, no, we're not going to give into this. Might is right, and you get to decide who lives and who dies. And that's what we're up against. And if we don't win, then we are all in trouble. We are all in trouble. It's really about kind of the whole world order that we're going into. And Israel and the United States are trying to tell you that it's a world order where they dominate, and there's no international law that applies to them. And I would think that most people should be horrified and scared by it, and so redoubling our efforts to stop it.
Yeah,
and so we are. It did hit our boats, but obviously we're not stopping. We are working right now to see how we can get back at sea. I mean, even if it's with a raft, right? Because what we were carrying on the Conscience, the ship that was hit, it's a drop in the ocean in terms of what Gaza needs. It wasn't about delivering humanitarian aid, though we were carrying it, but we can't carry much. We had a civilian vessel, right? Turkey did not release our cargo ship, and it was really about this notion that you have to challenge these unlawful policies, and our states should be doing it. But if they're not, then we're going to do it, and we hope these other organizations and other civil society, we all mobilize. Let's take any way we can to break down these walls where Israel's slaughtering Palestinians. I mean, it's a death camp, and we need to break through those walls in any way that we can. And so we hope to open this corridor to Gaza by not alone, but hopefully leading the way, inspiring others to come with. I've been saying, even these human rights, and I'm sorry I'm going on so long, but you have all these humanitarian organizations which do great work in trying to tend to the humanitarian needs of people, but they have to really abide by Israel's rules, right? Or they risk, like we see UNRWA has been banned, and their operations severely kind of curtailed and defunded, and every single organization that does work in Gaza or anywhere in Palestine is really afraid of that, of defying or doing something to anger Israel, and then all of their operations will be stopped, and they don't want to risk that, obviously, because they have people that they're trying to help survive. I understand that, but you're at a point where we're not helping by playing nice, right? You are not helping when you have 3,000 trucks waiting outside Rafah, and we're just waiting for Israel to open, instead of just organizing together and driving through. Who cares? Drive through, get there any way that you can. Get into, break down the walls of this death camp, but it just going to take this massive civil disobedience, and I think there are too many. Our imagination is a little bit limited in thinking that we have to play this political diplomatic game, and I think that we can't. Maybe one part of it can, but one part's just got to move. Sorry, I'm going on too long.
No, that was great.
Yeah, Huwaida, I think you bring up a really good point in terms of the response should, both historically and presently, in seeing the actions and the disregard for law, for norms, for just basic humanity, that we should fear that, in many ways, both in terms of that being employed upon us, but there's such a specific storied relationship between the United States and Israel, and some of its other satellite states, but of utilizing those capacities and intentions to develop and employ and test technology and tactics and means of surveillance and oppression and violence, and then we have seen those come home. We've seen them come home historically, and we've seen them come home presently, and not, as Americans, not looking at the absolute travesty of what is happening in Palestine and taking and feeling that as fear that it will come home is I think a piece that as we organize is necessary for us to communicate, because unfortunately fear is such a primary driver of action and movement, and breaking through those social norms of when it's that this cannot stand, like anything is better than this, and building that sentiment here, I think is critical in disrupting the system from within.
Yeah. So many people think that Palestine is, thousands of miles away. It doesn't really concern me, or maybe I feel bad. Yeah, that's horrible, but what am I going to do about it, or what can I do about it? And that, I think, is a debilitating thought when part of our work, those who know the connections need to make those stronger and need to, I think, be communicating with a lot of not just those organizations in the movement, but even outside. And we have a lot of mobilization now around all of the things that Trump is doing to all kinds of communities. But I think there needs to be more work also in these spaces of people understanding that Palestine is not separate from that. Our civil liberties are being decimated here in the United States to silence us on Palestine, right? You write an op-ed, you can be disappeared if it's criticizing what Israel is doing, and that's not to say where billions of our tax dollars are going instead of going into our own communities, and so many connections besides the one that you're talking about in terms of even bigger dangers to our lives here in the United States if we allow this to happen to Palestine, to Palestinians. I think that awareness needs to be a lot stronger. And personally, I know many people have given up on the party, the duopoly here. I know a lot of activists that are still trying within the parties. We're fighting here in Michigan in highlighting some of the people who call themselves, humanitarian and Democrats, and yet are silent or even bought into AIPAC and what they're doing. And people are waking up. It's slow. People are waking up. I think we need to do that work and figure out how to escalate that work in this time. We are going to continue to organize kind of the direct actions and to try to get to Gaza via the sea. The international solidarity movement is still on the ground in the occupied Palestinian, like the West Bank. If people want to look up how to join there, to witness, to connect, taking those stories back home does really a lot in helping people. Our former colleague who was killed by Israel, Rachel Corrie, said it 22 years ago now. She said no amount of lectures or videos, documentary, nothing could prepare you for what you see on the ground. And it does leave a lasting impact. Of course, not everyone can go, but if you are able to get there, ISM will gladly receive you. We need more people, more eyes on the ground, certainly appreciated by Palestinians, and then coming back and educating and organizing in our communities. We keep doing these things and also discussing how to how to build more power and escalate.
Absolutely. I think in general, and I'm noticing the time, and I think we're going to wrap up soon. But I think just a general takeaway from what you all have just said is that, you know, we live under these rules. We live under the system that we didn't make the rules. We didn't have any control. We don't have any control over how the rules work. And the people that made the rules, the entities that made the rules or that enforce the rules, are allowed to break them however they want. Israel's allowed to, you know, commit a war crime in Maltese waters and suffer nothing for it, because the powers that control the U.S. in specific, which controls the architecture of our international diplomacy frameworks, it has decided that, you know, that's fine for Israel to do that. But if you're trying to send aid into Gaza against a blockade, then it's a problem. And I think, again, I guess this goes back to the idea of resisting and building, right? The idea of we need to build our own system with its own rules that actually prioritize people over profits, and aid instead of arms, medicine instead of militarism, etc. You know, the things that people need instead of the things that the system needs to exploit us. And so I guess with that, I want to ask each of you sort of, for Huwaida, I guess my question is more about the flotilla, but really in general, how is this work continuing? What comes next? How can organizers and organizations in the U.S. support the flotilla and your efforts to break the blockade on Gaza? And what would you ask of people to do? And then Tom, I guess the same question for you, but with your work locally in Vermont.
Yes, thank you for that question. Really quick, if people aren't following us on social media, please do, because as things develop and as we need, action supportive, we will put it out there. So if you look up the Freedom Flotilla Coalition on social media, please follow us. We are on X and Blue Sky, and Instagram is where we post first. But we do have a petition also up asking, Malta has not let our ship, since our ship was hit, it's been sitting outside in international waters off the coast of Malta, and Malta won't let it in. We have people who are really shell-shocked still on board from the crew that have needed to get off. We haven't been able to repair the ship. So again, more of that complicity. So we have this petition on board. We have different things that we're following in terms of trying to get the ship fixed or try to get another ship or move as fast as we can. And as soon as we have more things that people can contribute to, we will put it out on social media there. But we are dealing with, not only the United States and Israel, but really all of the countries in the region that are complicit in trying to stop us, which is shameful and horrific, but we won't be stopped. So we definitely need all eyes. We definitely need all energy. Please follow us and you'll be hearing more from us soon on that.
Amazing. Thank you for everything you're doing, Huwaida. In terms of Cooperation Vermont and what we're doing here in terms of building and resisting, a huge part of it is identifying the people inside of our communities who are most threatened, and providing direct action support for their in support of them, for their human rights, for their dignity, and then opposing the utilization of our space, of our money, our tax money, of our infrastructure, that is actively engaged in supporting the kind of imperial oppression that exists. So whether it's boycotting and supporting migrant justice, and as they oppose workers' rights and work to remove migrant workers from our farms here, it looks like that. If it's decommodifying land that would otherwise be purchased by private equity, and enabling that to be put into localized food production, and supporting our communities as they struggle with responding to our climate crisis and the lack of federal support and the inability of the state to meet those demands. It looks like that. And it's an everyday thing. It's conversations. it's support, it's opposition, it's protesting, it's voting with your dollar, and it's just being engaged and clear-eyed, and raising that awareness to build the network that's necessary to meet the moment.
Well said. And I think that's a great note for us to wrap up on. Thank you both so much for joining. And thank you to the audience for tuning in and for allowing me to be your guest host this week. I am no David Cobb, but I'm really trying. Yeah. And like Tom said, it's an everyday 24/7, 365 process. Like Huwaida said as well, it's more urgent now than ever before that we stand up for what's right, and that we continue to resist and continue to build. So very excited to be in this struggle for liberation with you all, and I look forward to speaking again soon. Have a good evening, though, in the meantime.
Thank you.